Now, the US is reportedly increasing its military presence in the Middle East by sending an aircraft carrier. That's according to US media, though the Pentagon has not confirmed the deployment. The USS Abraham Lincoln and accompanying ships are en route from Southeast Asia. The aircraft carrier was reported to be in the South China Sea. Likely destinations are thought to include the Mediterranean Sea and the Persian Gulf. The Trump administration has threatened to strike the Iranian regime following Tehran's brutal crackdown on anti-government protests. The demonstrations appear to have declined for the moment, but a number of Iranians are vying to provide a figure around whom the opposition can unify.
Reza Pahlavi's supporters have become the most vocal Iranian opposition in exile. Many of them are royalists who want him to ascend the throne his late father, Iran's last Shah, was forced to flee during the Iranian Revolution in 1979. It's a goal Pahlavi himself says he does not share, but one that has divided the opposition for decades.
His followers are very committed, very passionate, sometimes also radical and very aggressive. But what you have, and that's a pretty recent phenomenon, around the circles supporting Crown Prince Pahlavi, you have Iranians who are not royalists and who were not supportive of him, who say, okay, if it's for the sake of unity, then we prefer him in a transition phase in Iran.
To a degree, that's also true for many of the other prominent figures in the Iranian diaspora. Like Masih Ali-Nejad, an Iranian-American journalist and women's rights activist who has campaigned against compulsory hijab laws since she had to leave Iran in 2009. And Nazanin Bonyadi, an Iranian-born British actress and human rights advocate who has used her public profile to urge international support for protesters and women's rights in Iran. Then there's Hamid Ismail-Yoon, a Canada-based dentist who turned into an advocate for justice after his wife and daughter were among the many people killed in 2020 when Iran's Revolutionary Guard shot down a Ukraine International Airlines flight minutes after it took off from Tehran. Shirin Ebadi, a Nobel Peace Prize-winning Iranian lawyer who has spent decades championing democracy and human rights from exile. And Abdullah Motadi, head of the left-wing Komala party of Iranian Kurdistan. He advocates a democratic transition and the inclusion of ethnic minority perspectives from exile in Iraq. In an attempt to unify the opposition in exile, they all joined a loose alliance with Pahlavi in 2022. One that quickly unraveled amid growing skepticism over his personal ambitions. And while those doubts persist, most have avoided open confrontation in the name of unity against a common adversary.
In the past, it was also a strategy, of course, of the regime, and I think it is also happening now, to divide the opposition by focusing on one of them, on one of the groups that would alienate the others. So there are many tactics and many strategies going on to divide the Iranian opposition abroad.
And then there's the one group none of the others want to have any business with. The Mujahedin-e-Khalq, led by its Paris-based leader Maryam Rajavi, an Islamist Marxist organization that presents itself as a democratic alternative to the Islamic Republic, yet remains deeply controversial among Iranians because of its armed past, its alliance with Saddam Hussein during the Iran-Iraq War, and its cult-like leader-centric structure. Inside Iran, where no reliable polling exists, the true level of support for any opposition faction remains impossible to measure.
Certainly, Iranians in Iran are, I think, not just looking to the diaspora for their future. They're the ones that are suffering an inordinate amount of physical, emotional, and economic pain. And there are plenty of activism and ideas and agency that exists inside the country. But many Iranian opposition figures and leaders are in Iran's jails.
For now, the opposition both in and outside of Iran shares one common goal: the end of the Islamic Republic. Should that be achieved, they will have to figure out what or who should follow it.
Let's get more on this now with Behnam Ben Taleblu. He's a senior director of the Iran program at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, a conservative U.S. think tank focusing on security. Behnam, what do you make of these reports of the U.S. sending an aircraft carrier to the Middle East?
Great to be with you. And just a small clarifying note, FDD is a nonprofit, nonpartisan foreign policy think tank focusing on U.S. national security. With respect to the reports, I mean, I think this is more proof by the Trump administration that they're looking to keep their options open at a period of time when you see the rhetoric changing by the administration, potentially leaning a bit more into diplomacy. The behavior, the quiet signaling, you could say, about the administration is trying to tell the Iranians that all options remain on the table. Potentially, this could be used to force a different, I don't want to say resolution, because certainly the Iranian street remains in full revolutionary mode against the state, but it certainly could use leverage, or it could bolster the president's case and give him leverage should he decide to more meaningfully support protests if they pick up again.
So you're saying keeping options open. Could there also be an interpretation that these are mixed signals, with Donald Trump saying, thank you, Iran, for not killing more protesters on the one hand, but reports saying sending an aircraft carrier to the region?
Yeah, I think the mixed signals is part of the strategic ambiguity the Trump administration has, I would really say, frankly, cultivated on Iran from day one. I mean, just look at the four very different types of policies pursued nearly one after another in 2025, whether that was diplomacy, military options, economic sanctions, and ultimately multilateral pressure through the Europeans at the United Nations. So certainly all options remain on the table. I would say right now, at a point of time where between 12,000 and 20,000 Iranians have been killed based on open source reporting in the most violent crackdown from the state against the street, I think the president does need to actually take a few of them off the table, one of them being, of course, diplomacy with a regime like the Islamic Republic. To this regard, there's been a lot of helpful commentary by some of America's transatlantic partners, particularly Germany and Netherlands, about the need to close the door and potentially even the next chapter on the Islamic Republic. So whether it's strategic ambiguity that's cultivated or, just mixed signals due to bureaucratic stuff here in Washington, D.C., I think the president is showing that he can walk and chew gum at the same time, and all eyes will be on Tehran to see how they interpret it.
Let's talk now about Iran's former Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, who has called for targeted U.S. strikes on the command structure of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. Are U.S. decision makers like Donald Trump going to listen to him?
Well, certainly U.S. decision makers like the most important one, the commander-in-chief, are listening to regular briefings they're getting from the NSC, from the intelligence community, from the Defense Department, both about the threats and the opportunities to push back against the Islamic Republic of Iran. One reason potentially why the U.S. may be skeptical is potentially because of the firepower that the regime has, which we saw during the 12-day war, and the potential cycle of escalation that, a decapitation strike against the regime or a punishing strike against the regime could have. Conversely, of course, the president is the one who several times during the past 3 weeks of Iran's national uprising chose to touch this issue of supporting Iranian protesters. And there he has put more than his own credibility on the line. He's put America's credibility on the line. And while you have many nationalist figures like the Crown Prince talking about airstrikes, they're not the only ones. This is one of the most resonant things I'm hearing in the dribs and drabs of communication that you can get out of Iran, that they are looking for America to do more than signal support. They're looking to America to help level the playing field between the protesting street and the repressive state. And at a point in time when the regime has killed so many, it's not just exiles, it's not just opposition figures, it's not political figures, it's masses of Iranians who have felt the temper of the Islamic Republic's blade. It's the families of those who are now being abused. And it's the fact that if the president is going to be taking a victory lap for getting a stay of execution for 800 people, he must remember that this is a regime that has executed over 2,000 last year alone in 2025, breaking its own records, and that this is a regime that actually has a bounty on the U.S. president's head.
Behnam, are you saying that there's support from within Iran for U.S. military action?
That's one of the most interesting things that I've been seeing. Certainly you have civil society, certainly you have artists, certainly you have several cadres of Iranians who would disagree. But everything I have heard en masse whether you're looking at social media, whether you're looking at messages that Iranians themselves have been choosing to send out, is that they need help when it comes to leveling the playing field from the street against the state. And many actually knew they were going to their certain deaths, but assumed that America would be following them, assumed that America would be putting its money where its mouth is, assumed that America's reputation for being the beacon of liberty could carry over to supporting the most pro-American street in the Middle East. So that is one of the sentiments, again, that in the 3 weeks of protests, and again, in the dribs and drabs of 1 week internet shutdown, has come out most interestingly from a very nationalistic society.
Behnam Ben Taleblu from the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Thanks for talking to DW.
Thank you.
Cornelius Adebahr is an expert on Iran at the German Council on Foreign Relations and joining us now to talk about this. Thanks so much for your time. We just heard there all options are still on the table for the US when it comes to Iran. How likely do you think an American strike on Iran is?
I guess for the United States, all options are always on the table. They have never ruled out any military strike. The likelihood has certainly decreased following President Trump's latest comments. He seems to be backtracking. He was quite outspoken, maybe on the verge of deciding about a strike. He was briefed on military options earlier this week, but with his remarks on his threats having an effect, executions being stalled, this looks like at least a temporary withdrawal of this option for the moment. The question is also one of assets. The United States did not have an aircraft carrier in the region because it was moved to the Caribbean for that Venezuela strike. So it also shows the limits that the US maybe cannot strike anywhere, anytime, if it is a strike of choice, obviously, and not one that is where their hand is forced.
There's very little news coming out of Iran, nothing about any further protests. Does that suggest that the regime's really brutal suppression of the uprising, that it's been successful?
It is at least what we have to assume for the moment. It's been a couple of weeks of increasing protests, of increasing crackdown on the other side, and the fact that with the brutality of the regime, the presumed thousands of dead and more than 10,000 of people that were apprehended, this is really meting out the harshest of crackdowns, as the regime has done in the past, and so it is together with the internet blackout, the near total internet blackout, phone lines were cut. This has shown to what lengths the regime is willing to go just to stay in power. We cannot say for now what the next couple of weeks will bring, whether there is some movement on the side of the protesters, whether they can unite around certain issues or people, or indeed whether a US strike will tip the balance once more.
So where would you say this leaves the government? I mean, how much support does it have inside Iran?
Well, there is still considerable support. Estimates range from about a fifth to a fourth of the population which actually support the Islamic Republic, either ideologically or because they benefit materially. They have jobs, they rely on the Islamic Republic. They fear that should there be a regime change or a different political system, that they would lose their jobs, they would lose their the wealth, including. So many people have enriched themselves over the course of nearly 5 decades of the Islamic Republic. So this is a substantial group of people that is willing to take to the streets, to organize counter demonstrations, and who support the crackdown of the government. It isn't the majority from all what we know, but it is substantially enough still for the regime to rely on them.
And just talk to us a little bit more about the Iranian opposition. I mean, has it been able to unite around a common cause beyond general dissatisfaction about how things are?
Well, that's unfortunately the challenge of the opposition with a crackdown, the current crackdown, but also with the ongoing repression. It is really hard for an opposition, for civil society to coalesce around certain issues, to meet and to say make plans for an orderly transition. There's been a pamphlet published about a constitutional assembly which should be called for in order to enable this transition. So there is on paper, there is a plan, if you like, how this could be brought about, but this is hard to translate into reality when it doesn't have the troops, so to say, the strength, the people's strength, but also it doesn't have the organizational strength or a unifying figure around which they could rally.
All right. Political analyst and Iran expert Cornelius Adebahr. Thank you, Cornelius, for your time.
Thank you, Anya. Have a nice day.